Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a recent reads video for you. I'm going to be talking about 8 books today that I've read recently, but 3 of them were kind of for college, so I'm not going to talk about them very much. And rather than going through them in the order that I've read them, I think I'm going to start with those 3 and get them out of the way, and then we'll talk a bit more about some of the other books that were for fun. So the first book that I'm going to talk about today was The Basics of Hebrew Poetry by Samuel T. Esco. I picked this up because I did a class on the Psalms last term, and this was something the tutor recommended. I only read a bit of it during that class and then I finished it over the summer. It took me quite a while to get through it because it's quite dense in places, but I found it really interesting. I'm not going to say anything more about it than that really, because I don't think you want to know anything more than that. I will also say this is the only book that I'm going to be holding up today because it's the only one that I have in physical still with me. A few of the others I borrowed either from friends or from the library, a couple were ebooks, and the other ones, because I was visiting home, I left them when I came back because I didn't need them because I don't have a lot of space here. Okay, so that's the first one that was for college. I also borrowed 2 books. So over the summer I have been doing some volunteering with a charity called CAP, which is Christians Against Poverty, and that's kind of linked to my university programme. We have to do what's called a community placement. So this was my community placement, the chance to meet people in need in the community and work with a Christian charity that is supporting them. The lady I was shadowing lent me 2 books to do with charities and how they work. One was called Mission Drift, which was about how charities can lose focus on their original goals depending on different influences, but particularly financial influences. If they're getting big donations from different places, that can have an influence on how their goals work. And then I also borrowed one called Toxic Charity, which was to do with the idea that sometimes just giving people stuff isn't helpful, doesn't help them progress or develop, just helps them stay stuck in the same situation rather than actually helping them to get out of that situation, if that makes sense. So if you kind of think of like a charity like The Big Issue that works with homeless people, their tagline is a hand up, not a hand out. And this was kind of the principle this book was about how we can actually help people work their own way out of situations of poverty rather than just constantly giving them stuff that perpetuates the cycle of poverty they're in. Yeah, so both of those books were about charity and some positives and some negatives. I agreed with some of the stuff they said. I didn't agree with other bits, but I found both books very interesting and I'm not going to say anything more about them than that. Okay, so the books that I read for fun. The first book that I'm going to talk about today that I finished was The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. I will have a book diary for this that I filmed. If that is already available, I will link to that in the description box. I will also link to our Space Sirens discussion for it because this was our Space Sirens book for, I think it was for July, but I didn't read it until August, and then we were very delayed in having the live show. So I will link to that live show. You can hear a bit more about our thoughts. The live show has a non-spoiler section, then a spoilery section. The book diary is entirely spoiler-free, but I'll go into a little bit about what I thought about it here so you get just kind of an overview, but go check out those if you want to know more of my thoughts. So The Space Between Worlds is science fiction. It's set in a world where they've discovered parallel worlds and how to travel between them. But there are quite strict kind of guidance about that, so they can only travel to worlds that are similar enough to Earth Zero, which is the Earth that they exist on. Otherwise, if the parallel world is too different, then they can't survive the journey. But the other stipulation is you can only travel to a world where your counterpart on that world has already died. So you have to have existed on that world and not still be alive on that world to be able to travel there. This means that there's actually quite a narrow pool of people that are able to travel to multiple worlds, and the main character in the book is called Kara, and she has died on all but 8 of the known accessible worlds. So she is a traverser, she is someone who travels between the worlds, and I was expecting the story to be a lot about travelling to different worlds and seeing what they were like. But it wasn't really that. There was an element of that, but it was a lot more about classism and structural oppression and issues in society and gangs and nature and nurture, and how the same people in different societies can have different experiences. So it was really, really fascinating. It was quite political in a lot of ways, and there were certainly some kind of thrillery aspects, which I quite liked. And it was just, yeah, it was a bit deeper and more intense than I was expecting. It was very unpredictable. There were some things that I figured out, but there was a lot of stuff that really took me by surprise, and it felt very fast paced. Certainly from the second half. What I would say, there was a lot of plot, but it was more character driven because it was how Kara reacted to the different situations that pushed the plot forward. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 5 stars. Yes, I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. And if you want to know more of what I thought about it, then do go and check out that book diary and our live show discussion. The next book that I finished was actually another sci-fi. So I read The Martian by Andy Weir. I borrowed this as an ebook from the library on the recommendation of a friend, and I really enjoyed it. So the concept of this, if you are not familiar with it, is it's about an astronaut who gets accidentally left on Mars when the rest of his crew have to evacuate. They think he's dead. He survived miraculously, essentially, and he's left behind, and then he's got to figure out how to survive on Mars, how to try and get back in communication with Earth to let them know he's there, and then how they're going to rescue him, and very much had a kind of disaster movie feel to it. It's one of those stories where like things are constantly going wrong and he's constantly having to adapt to them. It was written with such humour. It just is a very funny book, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I read it really quickly. I don't know really what else to say about it. It's not very fresh in my mind. It's not one that's like stayed with me. I do really want to see the film, and maybe at some point I'll reread the book and watch the film and do maybe a comparative review, because I quite like doing those, but I'm not sure when I'll get a chance to watch the film. But I'm interested to see how it's different. My friend said that they changed up the ending a little bit, which would be interesting to see what they did, because that was one thing. The when I was reading the ebook, I thought I had still like 30 pages left, and then it ended really abruptly, and it turned out that the final 30 pages were a chapter from another of his books. So I was a bit like, oh. And my friend, when I said that to her, she said, oh, it does end very abruptly anyway, but I think it was exacerbated in my case because I thought there were another 30 pages to go, and because you can't flick ahead in ebooks as easily as you can in regular books, I didn't realise that the story ended 30 pages before it did. So I gave that one 4 stars, and I really did enjoy it, and we'll probably pick up more stuff by the author. I've heard mixed things about his other books. The Martians, I think, has been the book that most people have enjoyed the most of his so far, but we'll see. The next book that I finished was This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. I loved this. I gave this 5 stars. I read Cinderella's Dead when it came out last year and enjoyed that enough that I pre-ordered this book, especially when I heard the concept. The concept sounded amazing. So the main character, Bree, has magical power kind of over plants. She can make plants grow faster, she can revive plants that seem to be dead, but where she lives in Brooklyn, she has to try and keep it under wraps, and people think it's a bit weird when they find out, so she feels very pent in. She then is left a property out on the edge of a village by a relative she didn't know she had because she was adopted at birth, and so she and her parents move out to this big old mansion and start clearing it up, and then she starts learning a bit more about her family history and her powers and what she can and can't do, and the story kind of develops from there. There's a lot of references to Greek mythology, which was really interesting and made me want to learn more about Greek mythology because I don't know very much about it. Ended on a real cliffhanger, so I'm now anxiously awaiting the second volume, which I think comes out next year. It's only a duology as well. Yeah, it's looking like the second book, This Wicked Fate, is due to come out next year. I will be pre-ordering that. Kaylin Bayron has fast become an auto-buy, auto-read author for me because I enjoyed this so much, and I now trust her writing. Like, I've enjoyed both of her books that I've read, and so far she's published 2 books and I love both of them, so I definitely will be buying the next volume of this story, and will probably buy anything else that she writes because I've enjoyed her book so much so far. So really highly recommend that one. That was only just come out, I think it came out in July or maybe very end of June. It hasn't been out for very long, and I've read it really quickly, much quicker than I usually do when I pre-order books, so that's a positive at least. I justified buying it by reading it really soon. Yeah, and I, as I said, gave that 5 stars, no hesitation in giving it 5 stars. Really recommend it. Really well plotted, really good character development, and just the right level of predictable. There was one bit where someone said something and I was like, that is really significant, that's going to come back to bite you, and it did. Yeah, really enjoyed that. I'm going to stop rambling about it now. The next book that I'm very briefly going to mention, but I'm not going to talk about loads, I finished in French the second volume of Les Miserables, which is Cozzette. So I've still got the full book in English ongoing. I've just started the third volume in French and in English, but my French volumes are individual books, whereas my English edition is one whole book. I finished the second volume. I gave the second volume itself 4 stars. The story aspects, the character aspects, I really enjoyed. I'm finding that now I'm getting more used to Victor Hugo's writing style in French. I'm understanding a lot more without necessarily having to refer to the English, but this particular volume had a lot of kind of sidetracks. He likes to give a lot of detail that feels really unnecessary to make very minor story related points. So this book is probably quite a well-known thing. This volume starts with a hefty chunk about the Battle of Waterloo. In my French edition it was about 90 pages. In the English edition it was a bit short, it came to about 60 pages. That's to do with how it's formatted. And that's the start of this volume, and it was a real slog to get through it. I've been listening to the Les Miserables Reading Companion podcast, which has helped me to understand a little bit more why Victor Hugo goes on these massive sidetracks. But aside from kind of some political points he's trying to make, the only really relevant bit to the story of that whole section is the final chapter, which is about a character that we've already met and a character that will be significant later, and gives a bit more detail about their backstories. You could argue that the references, the arc of Napoleon's journey is reflected in the overall story. This is some of what she says on the Les Mis Reading podcast, but yeah, it just felt long and unnecessary to me. And the other people involved in the read along were talking about getting t-shirts that say "We survived Waterloo" because it did feel like we survived. More on the whole book when I finish the whole, and of course when I finish the next volume in French I will give a little bit of a chat about that. But it's hard work getting through that, and I'm taking it quite slowly now. I'm not keeping up to date with the other people on the read along at all. I'm not going to finish it in time. I'm just going at my own pace now. Anyway, and then the final book I'm going to talk about today is A Desolation Called Peace, which is by Arcadie Martin. It's the second book in the Tex Calan series. I think it's a duology at the moment. I'm not sure if she's intending to write more books in this world. I really hope she does, because I really enjoy the world she's created. The world building is fantastic. We don't often talk about that in sci-fi as much as we do in fantasy. I mean, there are a lot of elements of these books that feel more like fantasy than science fiction, but they are science fiction. They're set, I think, in a far distant future in the Tex Calan Empire. It is about the interactions of the Empire with a small independent colony called LaSalle Station. The main character, Mahit, is the ambassador from the station to the Empire. The first book is a lot about how she became the ambassador and trying to figure out what happened to the previous ambassador, and this second book builds off the end of the first book, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail about it because I don't want to give away spoilers for the first book. If you want to know more about the first book, I did do a book diary for it, which I'll link below for you, and it was also our book club pick the Space Siren, so I'll link the live show discussion for that first book to give you a bit more context on it. I can't say a lot more about the second book, as I say, because I don't want to spoil the first book, but I really enjoyed this. I think I actually rated this higher than the first book. I think the first one I gave 4 stars and this one I gave 4.5 stars, which I rounded up to 5 on Goodreads. Particularly once I got really into it. Like, what I enjoy about these books is a lot of stuff happens in a short space of time, but it's not necessarily a fast-paced book. They're quite wordy, and that's to do with the way the Empire is styled. I liked that. From what I remember, the first book was entirely from Mahit's perspective. I may be wrong on that, I can't remember it because it's been a little while since I read it. What I liked in this book was that there were multiple perspectives, multiple narrative viewpoints, and we were introduced to some really interesting new characters who I really liked, and some characters that we had met before were developed more, which I really liked. A couple of those characters became real favourite characters for me, and it was nice to see a wider view of the Empire and different elements of it. Yes, I really highly recommend that series. Check out my book diary and Space Siren's discussion of the first book if you'd like to know more. I think that's all I've got to say for today. Let me know if you've read any any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know some of what you've been reading recently and what you've enjoyed about it. Or if you just want to let me know you've been here, leave me a plant emoji for This Poison Heart, because that was probably my favourite book of the ones I've talked about today, and also because all my orchids are flowering at the moment and it's really lovely. Maybe not quite all of them, but the ones that are flowering look really good. Yeah, leave me a plant emoji down in the comments just to let me know that you've been here and you've made it this far. You can also like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also find me on social media. All that information is listed for you in the description box below. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!